Chapter 32 On the Wiles of the Enemy Against Those Who Have Entered the Right Path. But suppose a man has overcome the first two obstacles, is filled with the desire to be free of the bondage of sin, and has begun to work for it without delay. Even here, the enemy does not leave him alone. He changes only his tactics, but not his evil desire, and hope to make the man stumble against some stone of temptation and so ruin him. The Holy Fathers describe such a man as being under fire from all sides, from above and below, from left and right, from front and rear. From everywhere arrows speed towards him. Arrows from above are suggestions for excessive spiritual works above his powers. Arrows from below are suggestions to reduce or even completely abandon such works through self-pity, negligence, and heedlessness. Arrows from the right are when, in connection with some undertakings and works, the enemy leads a man into temptations and the danger of downfall. Arrows from the left are when the enemies present concrete temptations and draw a man towards sin. Arrows from the front are when the enemies tempt and disturb a man by thoughts of what is to come. Arrows from the rear are when they tempt him with memories of past deeds and events. And all these tempting thoughts attack the soul, either inwardly or outwardly. Inwardly, through images and pictures of fantasy mentally imprinted on the consciousness, or through direct evil suggestions planted in the heart, accompanied by habitual impulses of passion. Outwardly, through the impressions received by external senses in a ceaseless flow, as we have said already. Moreover, our enemies have allies in our former sinful habits, and our nature corrupted by the fall of man. Having so many means to harm us, the enemy is never daunted by the first failures, and constantly puts into use now one, now another means of tripping or leading astray the servant of Christ, who eludes his power. After a man has decided to abandon his wrong ways and actually does abandon them, the first task of the enemy is to clear a space for an unhampered field of action against him. He succeeds in this by suggesting to a man who has entered the right path that he should act on his own and not go for advice and guidance to the teachers of righteous life, who are always attached to the church. A man who follows their guidance and verifies all his actions, both inner and outer, by the good judgment of his teachers, and priests in their parishes in the case of laymen, experienced startsi of monasteries, cannot be approached by the enemy. Whatever he may suggest, the experienced eye will at once see where he is driving and will warn his pupil. In this way all his wiles are defeated. But if a man turns away from his teachers, the enemy will at once confuse him and lead him astray. There are many possibilities which do not look evil, and those he suggests. The inexperienced novice follows them and falls into an ambush, where he is exposed to great dangers or is destroyed altogether. The second method of the enemy is to leave a novice not only without guidance, but also without help. A man who has decided to dispense with advice and guidance in his life, when left to himself, soon comes to the idea that extraneous help is unnecessary in the conduct of his righteous life and actions. But the enemy hastens his coming to this idea by concealing himself and refraining from attacking the novice, who, feeling thus free and unhampered, begins to imagine that this good state is the fruit of his own efforts, and so rests with them, and, while reciting his prayers about help from above, mutters them through his teeth merely as a meaningless formula. Help is not sought and does not come. So the novice is left to his own devices and powers, and such a man is easy prey to the enemy. The results of this self-delusion are, in some cases, that people undertake excessive tasks which are both untimely and beyond their powers. The strong excitation of energy produced by self-reliance gives them at first the strength to sustain such works for a while. But after a time their strength becomes exhausted, and they barely find enough energy to make the most moderate efforts, and often abandon them altogether. Others, firing their self-willed energy more and more, reach such a degree of self-reliance that they end by imagining that everything is possible for them. In this excited state they take disastrous steps, throw themselves into dry wells, jump down from the high rocks where their cave is, stop taking food altogether, and so on. All this is arranged by the enemy, unperceived by the tempted. Another result of self-delusion and of ascribing one's successes to oneself is to assume the right to give oneself special dispensations and indulgences. There is a form of prelist which, when something new is introduced into life, as for instance in the case of a man who has repented, makes days seem like months, and weeks like years. Thus, if a man has made a few efforts in the new order of life, the enemy easily hammers into his head the illusion. I have worked so hard, have fasted so long, spent so many nights without sleep, and so on. It is time to have a rest. Rest a while, suggests the enemy. Give respite to the flesh. A little distraction is indicated. As soon as the inexperienced novice consents to this, indulgence follows indulgence, until the whole order of his righteous life is upset, and he drops back into the life he has abandoned, and begins to live again in negligence and heedlessness, and never rolls up his sleeves. These temptations, to avoid the advice and guidance of others, to ascribe successes to oneself, to undertake excessive works, or to give oneself dispensations, are used by the devil not only at the beginning of righteous life. He attempts to use these suggestions during the whole course. So you can see for yourself how important it is for you to do everything with advice, never to ascribe any successes, however small, to yourself, to your own powers, and to your own zeal, to avoid all excesses and indulgences, and to lead a life which, though even, is energetic and alive, always following the order and rule once established by the example of the saints, who lived before you, and by the good judgment of experienced men, who are your contemporaries. Chapter 33. How the enemy diverts a man from righteous deeds and spoils them. The wiles of the enemy, indicated above, disorganize the whole righteous life of a man. If a man resists them and follows the right path unswervingly, the enemy devises other wiles and other stumbling blocks. In this case, he does not work against the man's life as a whole, but acts sporadically against every particular undertaking a good Christian sets out to do in accordance with God's will. From the moment we open our eyes in the morning after sleep to the moment we close them again for the night, we are surrounded by a succession of activities which follow one another and leave no moment empty, provided always we keep attention in ourselves and are not sick with laziness and negligence. Moreover, not only the practice of lifting the heart to God in prayer, not only the obligations of dealings with others in truth and love, not only the efforts to achieve a righteous equilibrium between body and soul in works of self-mortification, but even everyday affairs with laymen must all be directed towards achieving salvation, and practiced with strict attention, watchfulness, and diligence. God helps those who show their zeal to do all things rightly, by sending them His grace, and by granting them the protection of angels and the prayers of saints. But the enemy never sleeps. In everything we do, he strives to disrupt the smooth course of our efforts, and to lead us astray from right to wrong actions. He either hastens to stop us undertaking them, or, when they are begun, attempts to interfere with their progress. If he has failed in this, he strives to make their results worthless, or having once more suffered defeat, plots to deprive them of all value in the eyes of God by inciting vanity and conceit. St. John of the Ladder speaks thus about it. In all the efforts by which we try to please God, the demons dig 3 pits for us. First, they try to obstruct our good undertaking. Second, if they have suffered defeat in this first attempt, they try to make our work not according to God. When these thieves are unsuccessful in this scheme too, they steal noiselessly to the soul and flatter us by suggesting that we please God in everything we do. The first temptation is opposed by fervent zeal and memory of death. The second, by obedience and belittling oneself. The third, by always reproaching oneself. It was too painful for me until I went into the sanctuary of God. When divine fire enters our sanctuary, evil habits no longer have power over us, for God is a consuming fire, consuming every uprising and movement of lust, every evil habit, and all hardness and darkness, whether inner or outer, seen or thought. No pen can describe all that this means. Keep attention in yourself, and keep only one standard in your mind, to please God in everything, both great and small. Then life itself will teach you to clearly discern and see through the wiles of the enemy. However, I shall give you 2 or 3 examples of the confusion which the enemy brings to our soul to spoil our work, if this work must last for a certain time. For example, if a sick man is disposed to bear his illness with a good heart and does so, the enemy, knowing that he will thus become well grounded in the virtue of patience, attempts to disrupt this good disposition. For this purpose, he begins to remind him of the many good deeds he could have performed had his position been different, and tries to convince him that, had he been in good health, he would have achieved much in the service of God, bringing much benefit to himself and others. He would have been able to go to church, to talk to people, to read and to write for the instruction of his brethren, and so on. If he notices that such thoughts are accepted, the enemy introduces them into the man's mind more and more often, multiplies and embellishes them, makes them enter the feelings and incites desires and impulses to such actions by depicting how successful these or other works would have been, and by evoking regret that the man is tied hand and foot by his illness. Little by little, after frequent repetition of such thoughts and inner movements in the soul, regret is gradually transformed into discontent and vexation. Thus, the former good-hearted patience is upset, and, instead of a medicine sent by God and a field for practicing the virtue of patience, the illness presents itself as something hostile to the work of salvation. Thus, the desire to be free of it becomes ungovernable, though still with a view to freedom to perform good deeds and to please God in every way. Having led a man thus far, the enemy robs his heart and mind of the good purpose for which he desires to get well, and leaves only the desire of health for the sake of health, forcing him to look irritably at his illness, not as an obstacle to good, but as an evil in itself. As a result, impatience, not tempered by good thoughts, takes the upper hand and passes to complainings, thus depriving the sick man of the peace he enjoyed through good-hearted patience. But the enemy rejoices that he has managed to upset him. In exactly the same way, the enemy upsets a poor man who bears his lot with patience, depicting to him the good deeds he could do if he had a fortune. In a similar way, the enemy often upsets those who practice obedience, either in a monastery or living with some starets, or elder, convincing them that while they continue to lead this kind of life, they will be slow in attaining the desired perfection, and exciting in them a wish to go into seclusion, or in the wilderness. And his suggestions are often obeyed, but having obtained their wish to live in solitude, men give themselves to negligence, and so lose what they had acquired with great labor in their former life of obedience. The reverse also happens. When the enemy succeeds in driving a man away from solitude and seclusion, convincing him that he sits there alone with no profit to himself or others, whereas in a monastery useful works could flow day and night in an abundant stream. But when a man listens to the suggestion and enters the monastery, he does not manage to do the useful things he hoped to perform, and soon loses what he had gained in the wilderness and is left with nothing. A great many similar cases exist when the enemy succeeds in drawing a man away from one kind of occupation, tempting him with another, under the pretext that it is more useful, and thus disorganizes one and another alike. A man who has experienced teachers and advisors to talk with, and who obeys their instructors with humble submission, is easily delivered from all such temptations. But if for some reason a man is deprived of this blessing, let him keep attention in himself, and learn to discriminate strictly between good and evil according to Christian principles, on which the lives of us should all be based. If circumstances, which seem to us to impede our freedom in doing good, are not the result of our will, but are sent by God. Accept them submissively, and listen to no suggestions which make you depart from this submissiveness. When God sends such circumstances, He expects nothing more from you than that you should conduct yourself and act as occasion demands, within the possibilities it offers. Whether you are sick or poor, endure it. God demands that you do nothing but to endure. Enduring with a good heart, you will be constantly occupied in good. If you endure with a good heart, then, whenever God may look at you, He will find you either acting or existing rightly, whereas if a man enjoys good health, his good actions are intermittent. So if you wish for a change in your position, you wish to exchange better for worse. But if you should find yourself in a position which seems to restrict the scope of good deeds possible for you, and this position is the result of your own will, then, since you have probably chosen it for some purpose, keep to this purpose. Do not let your thoughts wander off to various other possibilities, but direct your whole attention to what you have to do in your position and keep it held there, thus calmly performing the actions connected with it, fully convinced that if you dedicate them all to God instead of to self-indulgence, the time spent on them will not be wasted, and they will be accepted by God as the fullest offering, and remain at peace.